Next on Garden Line, the All-American Display Gardens at McCrory Gardens in Brookings. And using ornamental grasses in the landscape.
The big blue stems are another native plant that does very well for us here in South Dakota.
This program is funded in part by Swiftel Communications.
Hello and welcome to Garden Line. I'm Stephen Monk. Tonight on our show, we'll go on location with Extension Horticulturalist David Graper, who will highlight grasses that we can be used in our yards to decorate our landscapes. And Garden Line revisits McCrory Gardens in Brookings to see what can be seen in the All-American Display Gardens. And as always, our panelists of lawn and garden experts will answer your questions, so get ready to call in. Our panelists are here with the most up-to-date information about gardening, lawn care, insects, trees, and a host of other lawn and garden concerns. Joining me in the studio this evening to answer your questions are John Keycafer, Brookings County Extension Educator, Rhoda Burrows, Extension Horticulturalist, Larry Osborne, Extension Plant Pathologist, and Mike Meckning, Extension Weed Specialist. Now, the phone number for you to call in with your lawn and garden questions is 1-866-595-SDSU. Again, that is 1-866-595-7378. Helping to answer the phones tonight are the members of the Minnehaha Master Gardeners. And remember, when you're calling in with your questions, please provide them with as much information as possible about your garden problem. Be ready to provide a description of the problem, when the problem first appeared, whether it's affecting any other surrounding plants, and moisture and soil conditions that may exist around the problem. Now, before we get to our questions, Garden Line paid a visit to the N.E. Hansen Research Gardens with Extension Horticulturalist David Graper. We learned that grasses can be used as a decoration, not just for the lawn. Dave highlights several varieties of ornamental grasses fit for the South Dakota climate.
Living on the prairie of South Dakota, grasses are a natural feature that we see in the landscape. And many of them can be very readily used in our ornamental plantings to add interest to the landscape during the summertime as well as into the winter months. There are dozens and dozens of ornamental grasses out there on the market, and we want to just focus on a few of the ones that might be adaptable to your area. The first one is ribbon grass. This is a grass that's quite adaptable to many kinds of locations, and if you want something that's going to grow fast and give you some good ground cover, this is a plant that's going to work very well for you. Most of the ones available have this variegated foliage with the white stripes down the leaves, which is quite attractive. They don't really produce much of a seed head, but they just have this nice green and white foliage most of the summer. If it gets too dry, you will see some browning in the plant, so it likes a location that's going to be maybe even a little bit shaded, or at least get some extra moisture during dry periods. Switchgrass, everybody's familiar with switchgrass with all the information about trying to use this to produce cellulosic ethanol, but it's a great plant to have in the landscape as well. There are a number of cultivars available. This is one called Heavy Metal that has kind of a blue-gray foliage color and kind of a reddish, very fine textured seed head. Makes a nice plant about 3 to 4 feet in height, stands up quite well, works very well in the landscape. Prairie Sky is another variety that's available. Has a more greenish appearance to it, to the seed heads especially, but again kind of that bluish color to the foliage. Again, a plant about 3 to 4 feet high. Makes a nice mass planting or a specimen plant use in the landscape. The silver grasses or the miscanthus are advertised a lot. We've trialed these both at our N.E. Hansen farm and also at McCrory Gardens and haven't had very good luck with hardiness on these. They do have a very beautiful seed head, Some of them have variegated foliage, which is also quite attractive, but we're just a little bit on the northern fringe. But if you live in the Sioux Falls area in the southeast, you might try some of these. You'll find them available at most nurseries and garden centers. They really have a graceful silvery look to them. They get real frizzy. The big blue stems are another good plant for us, and this is for if you're looking for a plant that's going to be tall. It's called big blue stem for a good reason. These plants often will get 6 to 8 feet in height. They again, the selected varieties have more of a blue-gray, blue-green foliage color to them, which will turn a little bit darker colored in the fall. They have what we call a turkey foot seed head to them. Again, not for the little border next to the house, but if you got a bigger bed, you want to put some of these in there to give some interest and height, the big blue stem might be a plant for you. Another native plant that does very well for us here in South Dakota, along with some of the other plants that we talked about today. These can all be great additions to your landscape and really make your garden attractive.
All right, well, we thank David for that information, because ornamental grasses sure can add a lot to our landscape around our homes. So, but now, before we get to our questions and answer sessions, we're going to do our topic of the week, or what the hot questions are that are coming in. So, John, we're going to start with you tonight.
I'm going to split it. I'm going to try to cover two things at once, and so I'll try to keep them a little bit short on both of them. First one that I wanted to talk about are monarch butterflies. These are one of those common beloved insects. You know, all the kids know what these are from the time they're in elementary school on. They're the classic example of a caterpillar turning into a butterfly, and they're easy to raise. You know, you catch a caterpillar, feed them some monarch or some milkweed leaves, and let them go for a couple weeks, and they turn into this butterfly. Neat thing about monarchs is that they do migrate, and this is kind of the traditional migration that you end up talking about a lot. People assume that when we talk about insects migrating that this is kind of what they do, but at this time of year now, last couple nights, you start seeing these butterflies grouping up. You'll see them in trees and kind of bunches, and then what they'll do is they actually work their way south and fly down to central Mexico and overwinter in the mountains in Mexico. And then the next spring, they'll work their way partway back north. So they'll all head to one spot to overwinter and then come back a little ways north. There they lay eggs, they reproduce, and the next generation works still further north. So there are organizations, this is one, Monarch Watch, that tag these butterflies and track movements of them. If you do come across a large number of them trying to spend the night in a tree, the outdoor campus down in Sioux Falls does a fair amount of tagging, and they'd like to hear about them and know where they are for that. And the other one actually came in today from Sioux Falls. Our host brought it in today, and this is an insect that we see moving around some at this time of year. This is an adult praying mantis, and people often ask if we have praying mantises around in the state. This is an example of a Chinese mantis. It's one of the species that does come in. We see it mostly in the southern part at times. And this is one that if you end up buying an egg case, this is a species that's pretty common as one of those that gets spread in gardens that way as pest control for people.
I think he's looking at me.
He is.
Trying to see if you're small enough that he can eat you.
Yeah, so.
Now, John, today when they brought that in, their question was, is this a walking stick?
No, it's not. It's actually in a separate order. It is closely related. The two orders are closely related, but this is actually a separate order. This is a praying mantis. It has those predatory legs. Walking sticks feed on leaves, and these eat whatever they can catch.
Okay. We got him.
Such as the host. He wasn't looking at you, Mike.
There we go.
He was trying. He was thinking about it.
He wanted to go back home, so.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, John. Rhoda, what do you have for us this week as topic of the week?
Well, we're getting into September now, and it's time to start thinking about planting our fall bulbs. Daffodils are one of the first that you want to plant because they take a little bit more time to get settled. We want to get those in by probably third week of October or so at the latest. And tulips you can plant pretty much up until the ground freezes. But now's the time, if you haven't ordered or purchased those bulbs, start looking now so that you get the best selection and prepare for spring. You can also get the fall blooming crocus and plant those, and in a few weeks they'll come up and bloom. So they're nice to have when everything else is dying back, and all of a sudden you have this beautiful, usually purple flowers. So.
All right, good. Thank you, Rhoda. Larry, with all the moisture and humidity we're having, do we have any disease problems that are showing up?
It's been a good year for a plant pathologist, I'll say that. Job security. Tonight I wanted to talk about some of the products. We get asked a lot of questions about what can I use on my tomato or my apple tree. And there's not really all that many products to choose from, so I brought a few with tonight, and we'll see if we can get our other camera to have some close-ups on these. Now, the brand names aren't important, but I wanted to show you a few things that are available. You see, again, we have just 3 different kinds of products here. We have some what we would call hard chemistry products, things like this is called tebuconazole, and that's a systemic fungicide, but it's pretty narrow range of what we can use that on. Because it's a systemic and because it sticks around a long time, it's not labeled on a lot of foods. It's labeled on mainly ornamentals. So this particular product is labeled for rose and flowers and some shrubs. It does pretty good on a lot of things like powdery mildew.
What do you mean by systemic?
Systemic means it gets into that plant and can move around the leaves just a little bit. It doesn't move far, but it stays maybe past a few rain events. It stays with that plant probably around 14 to 21 days. Okay, the next product here is just an old standby. This is one of the most commonly used fungicides in homeowner and even in professional gardening. Chlorothalonil, this particular brand, but there's all kinds of different brands of chlorothalonil. Some are dusts and some are sprays, I think, different formulations. You notice one thing about a lot of our products, they have the term multi-purpose fungicide. In this case, this is called multi-purpose fungicide. Other products might say the same thing, but the key thing to look at, and maybe we can get a close-up, right down here is a list of active ingredients. That's what tells us what chemical is in that product, and then we can know exactly what we're trying to target. And this particular product is used, again, on a wide range of things from ornamentals to fruits and vegetables. So depending on the brand, you want to read those labels. And I have an example. Keep that camera there. I have an example of a label.
Could you point to the label part here?
Yep, this is the active ingredient right here. They tell you what percentage of product that is. And it's hard to read, but that will say chlorothalonil for this particular product. The back of all these homeowner materials will have a pull-off label like this here. And it's usually a fold-out piece of paper that lists all the different hosts that product can be used on. So that's very important to read and follow label directions. And read that label also to understand the pre-harvest interval that you need to follow for these different products. Lots of different chlorothalonils. Some are 0, some are 7-day, some are even more, just depending on the formulation. And one last thing I wanted to talk about with these chemicals. This particular product here is widely used in our apple trees. We talk about calendar spray programs and the different kinds of ways to manage our fruit trees. This is liquid fruit tree spray. If we read closely, we see that this is not only a product called Captan, which is a fungicide and very effective against things like apple scab and some other common apple problems, but it's also 2 different insecticides. So this is what we call a combination product. It's got a fungicide and 2 insecticides. If our target is apple scab, for example, we may be applying a lot of extra chemical, much more than we need and much different chemistry than we need to solve that problem. You can buy things like Captan in its straight formulation, and then you can buy those insecticide products straight as well. So just remember, use the product that you need, but don't use products that target things that we're not really fighting.
Okay, good. Thank you, Larry. Read the label, and if in question, you can check with the local extension office as well.
Speaking of the local extension,
okay.
Right there, fact sheet 934 by our good friend Rhoda over here, and myself and one other author, Kay Rudin. We put the label information in there for most of these homeowner products. So
good. Thank you very much. Mike, what's up in the weed world?
Well, last week on the program, Chris Zarovstov, the Minnehaha County Extension educator, urged people to, if they're thinking about fall seeding of turf, do it now. And you want to get that done here fairly soon. Now is a great time to be seeding your fall turf, but it's particularly important if you've been battling crabgrass this year. Because the best thing to control crabgrass, and here we have a picture of crabgrass right here, small little plant, has little hairs all over the leaves and the stems. It's an annual. You got crabgrass out there, tough one to get, but the best thing to control is wait till next spring before it comes up and apply one of the weed and feeds The drawback is, though, when you apply those weed and feed products, you cannot seed turf into those areas. So if you got bald spots in your area, seed them now, so that way you can use your crabgrass preventers next spring. So next photograph, some things you're going to want to consider if you have a bald patch out there, an area without any grass. You're going to want to rough that spot up. You use a garden rake, or hey, you can pull out that garden weasel out of the shed. Maybe you didn't think that garden weasel was useful for anything, but by gosh, it's pretty good for roughing up the grass and getting just that ground rough enough to get the grass seed in there. You're going to want some seed soil contact on that grass seed to really increase that germination. I did this last year right about this time, and in the next photograph we can see what it looks like about 1 month later. So I did this last year at about the 1st of September, and this is what it looked like 1 month later. So pretty thick, nice little stand there of grass to really cover up that spot, because you guys know that if you've got those dead spots out there in your turf, that's just a future weed patch waiting to happen. So if you're going to be doing your crabgrass weed and feeds next spring, make sure you do your seeding this fall, your turf seeding this fall.
Okay, good. Mike, going back to what Rhoda mentioned as far as getting ready to put bulbs in, if it's a brand new site, has turf or something on it, would now be a good time to be thinking about Roundup or something before those bulbs go in?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, if you have perennials out there, you want to prepare some of these seed beds for next year, yeah, sometime this fall. I mean, you could maybe wait a little bit later so you don't have to look at this ugly dead spot for very long in the fall, but these like glyphosate, like Roundup, will be fairly effective later into the fall. As long as the plants are still green, it'll be effective. So yeah, good time to be controlling those perennials, preparing seed beds for next year.
Okay, good. Thank you, gentlemen and lady. So now we'll get into our questions. John, for you, we'll start with you. We have little black beetles about the size of grains of rice eating on the bottoms of our ripened cantaloupe. They eat where the cantaloupe rests on the ground. Is there anything we should do or can do to get rid of them?
Yeah, actually these are going to be one of those pests that we've talked about a couple times on Garden Line over the last few weeks. These are most likely those sap beetles, those picnic beetles, beer bugs, whatever you want to call them. They're all the same thing. They're usually black. They've got 4 little white or ivory spots on them, kind of shiny and crunchy, and they get into almost any sort of fruit or vegetable, especially if it starts to deteriorate at all. They'll get in there and feed in there. As far as control of them, pretty difficult, honestly, because once they get in there, it's hard to get any chemical in at them or try to do anything with them. Best thing to do is to try to keep any damaged fruits or vegetables from staying in the garden. Get them out of there as soon as you can, clean it up, just dispose of them. Other than that, you can try some attractant type traps, some bait things like beer, for example, or bread dough, something that'd be fermenting just a little bit, producing that carbon dioxide, and see if you can attract them to something else that way.
Okay. Rhoda, for you, is now a good time to transplant Siberian iris? I would like to take some from one area and plant it in another. Or should I wait until spring? Also, should I cut back the foliage on the Siberian iris back like we do hybrid iris?
I think you'd probably be okay transplanting the Siberian iris now.
That's Beersford is where that's coming from.
Yeah,
if that makes a difference.
Okay. Most of the reason we cut it back is not so much moisture loss, but more with our wind to keep the plant from falling over. Just helps keep it upright until the new roots get established. So it's kind of up to you whether or not you want to cut it back. If you think it's a little wobbly, then take off some of that top weight, but otherwise you don't have to. Once winter comes, you may want to cut it back some then.
Okay. Rhubarb, John, and this is one we don't usually get a lot of questions as far as rhubarb leaves being eaten, but they are being eaten by a white fuzzy caterpillar. Any idea what might be doing that?
Yeah.
What they can do about it?
Well, it depends on how far gone it is. The white fuzzy caterpillar is probably an arctiid larva. It'd be one of the tiger moth caterpillars. These particular ones get onto any number of different plants, and they seem to like ones that maybe have a little bit of toxicity to other things. They seem to be able to tolerate it. In some cases, they might even sequester some of those toxins and use them for their own defense. As far as getting rid of them, You know, especially if you don't have very many rhubarb plants, your most effective means is probably going to be to just go in and hand pick them. Otherwise, at this time of year, I'm not sure, maybe Rhoda would know more on that, I'm not sure how much damage they'll actually end up doing to rhubarb anymore at this point. I would think things are pretty well set for rhubarb.
We're getting pretty close to frost.
Yeah. So nutrients would already be in those plants, and
Well, they'll still be sending some down, but you know, unless they're just totally destroying the leaves. A lot of times when we see damage, it looks awful to us, but if you really look at it, you realize, oh, there's 3/4 of the leaf there yet.
Yeah, so they might end up looking ugly, but I think if you can tolerate them, just let them be for now.
Hand control?
Hand control is probably going to be about the best thing. Shouldn't
Right.
be too many of them on there.
Okay. Rhoda, coming back to you. Is September a good month to plant trees? Weeping white birch is the one that it looks like they're looking at.
We should be okay into September. I'm assuming this, of course,
Brookings,
is containerized, and I would make sure that the roots are mulched well once the ground gets pretty close to freezing. You don't want to put on a lot of mulch right away. At the same time that little creatures are trying to find their winter homes, but once they've pretty much found their homes, then you can go ahead and mulch it, and it should be fine.
Okay. Going to keep you on plate here. Is it possible to overwinter asparagus fern plants, several years old, that have been on their patio deck? Previous years, they brought them indoors. Can you leave them in the garden, mulch them? What are some optional approaches that they could do with their fern?
I don't recall for certain what the hardiness on those is, but I think it's more like zone 7 or 8.
And this would be Sioux Falls, where the call's coming from.
I think it'd be a stretch, if I remember correctly. I don't think they're quite hardy for us.
To be safe, and if it's worked in the past, perhaps bringing them in. But, sometimes it depends on the size of the container too, doesn't it? As far as how much soil.
Well, how much cold they can take, if I'm remembering correctly, we're talking maybe they could take it down to 20 degrees above zero. So.
Okay. All right, John, another one for you here. Lawn. Spider web is 6 inches in diameter. Is that something that can hurt the lawn, or? The question, I'm not real sure here as far, I think their concern is it going to damage the lawn, or is it anything maybe should be concerned about at all, or is it a beneficial insect?
Yeah, well, spiders are generally considered beneficial, and they won't hurt the lawn at all. I guess the one thing that I'd want to make sure is that it is truly a spider web to begin with. There are other things that can make webs, including, besides insects, some fungi, I believe, that'll produce a little webbing on there. But as long as it is truly a spider web on there, it won't do any harm to the lawn.
Okay. Mike, and this comes from Nebraska. Will preen keep my potato onions, multiplier type onions, and my Egyptian onions from multiplying if they use that? I have a lot of grass in my onion patch, and it would be great if I could use preen to clean it up.
Okay, well, maybe we have to talk about how preen works here first, because the grasses, it depends on if they're annual grasses or if they're perennial grasses. If they're perennial grasses, the preen's not going to do anything, but you might have a shot if they're annual grasses. What preen does is it controls the weed as it germinates from the seed. So, and what it'll do is it'll just linger there right on the soil surface. It won't really go down in the soil much, it's just right there at the soil surface. So you're going to want to get it on early before these grasses emerge. So since it's there, you've got those multiplier onions falling down onto that surface. As those roots touch that soil that's coated with the preen, those roots will get pruned and they'll get stubby and they won't develop quite correctly unless it's maybe a wet period and they can rapidly penetrate that barrier. So they're going to hurt those. They're probably going to hurt those multiplier onions. But the grasses, on the other hand, if you get that preen down before it emerges, you'll probably be okay. And those onions that are rooted below the soil surface should be just fine.
All right, good. Thank you. Rhoda, and this comes from Sturgis. Last year I planted a purple robe locust tree that appears to have been grafted. It has died away, and this spring a new tree began to grow. from what was left. What type of tree could be coming from this root?
Generally, those are grafted onto black locust, so just a normal black locust. It won't have that beautiful purple flower. And we're actually seeing some problems with the purple rub dying back to the graft, so it's not an uncommon problem.
Okay. Rhoda and Larry here. Why do ever-bearing strawberries have a hard area at the end of the stem and they quit growing? Inedible, opposite end, pointy end. And what do you do about this? Yeah, this might even be a John question here. So.
Pass to my colleagues here.
All right. John, looks like everybody's pointing at you.
Yeah, I'm up, huh? Chances are this is one of the true bugs feeding on it, probably a spittle bug or a leafhopper of some sort.
Tarnished plant.
Yeah, tarnished plant bug would be another common one. Something like that that's actually stabbing its mouth parts into that developing berry on there and feeding a little bit, and the reaction to that saliva that the true bug is using to feed causes some of these sorts of symptoms in a plant. And so as far as controlling that, it'd be a matter of trying to get rid of those bugs in the strawberries.
Okay. And this one comes from Mitchell, Rhoda. 2 variegated spirea, light green with little flowers that are purple, usually is what comes out on those. The new foliage is totally white this year, and they're wondering if they're lacking something other than water, because I think Mitchell's had plenty of moisture this year. But.
We could actually be seeing so much moisture, lack of even nitrogen this year, but you can also have problems with iron uptake under constantly moist conditions too. So if you see a little bit of green in the middle of the white, that probably means it's having trouble with iron as well. If you've not seen it in previous years, it's probably because there are moist conditions, and about the only thing you can do is try to make sure that you've got some good drainage. And then you could try something like Muriacid has a foliar spray, see if that helps. Again, it's getting pretty late in the year to do anything, but that would be one option. The other thing that can cause that can be some herbicide damage. And again, if we've had a lot of flooding in the area, sometimes that'll pick up some of those herbicides and take them to places we don't want them. So that is another possibility.
Okay. John, they're digging carrots and potatoes and something is eating them, and this comes from Andover. Round, short, fat, gray-colored, quarter-inch white grub tunnels in the carrots. Should they do anything now or spraying? And if so, what would you recommend?
Well, not exactly sure from the description which one that might be. Obviously, one of those insects is
Billbug, maybe, or something like that?
Could be something like that. Kind of hard to say, I guess, just from that description. But it's one of those that, you know, if the problem is there right now on a crop like that, you're going to want to deal with it right now. Obviously, some of that damage is done to that, but if you hope to salvage anything from it, you probably want to go ahead and try to do something about it now. As far as controlling it for next year, you'd want to figure out for sure what it is first, so you know what you're after, and hopefully try to catch it at a stage where maybe it doesn't get a chance to lay eggs in there and have the larvae develop in there.
Would it be a benefit to bring a sample into their local extension office to get it more of a positive ID?
Yep, absolutely. Okay. Yep, just take a sample in, and if they don't recognize it there, they will pass it on, and we'll get it identified for them.
Okay. We talked about rhubarb just a little bit ago. When can I replant rhubarb? And this is Sioux Falls.
Now's probably a fairly decent time, or early spring. It's one of those perennials that once it starts to shut down, then you can move it. I've said now, I guess I'd probably wait another few weeks or so, but after first frost or so.
All right, good. Larry, I guess I'm going to point this your way. Lennox, potatoes were planted in mounds. Each mound had at least one rotten potato in there. The rest of them had white spots and over them, and they're not really very edible. Never flooded, and not always wet. So they're wondering if you have some ideas what that might be.
Well, the rotten potatoes, that's going to be pretty common. It can be common any year. It doesn't have to be a wet year, but it's going to certainly be more common in a wet year to have soft rot. If there's a very foul odor associated with that soft potato, likely you have something called Erwinia soft rot. And there's not really much to do in terms of protecting against those kind of things. Over wet conditions and soil shifting and things like that can cause those. As far as white spots, other than scab, I'm not sure what we might be doing.
When I go back and read this, if I understand it, the rest of them had white spots all over them that they wiped off. And kind of, are they edible if they do that?
Well, are they edible?
There's another question.
Yeah, I think if the flesh looks undamaged, the starchy inside looks undamaged, I think they're perfectly fine. Sounds like they may be dealing with, maybe it's just some scab. Common potato scab. Smell that potato. Of course, all potatoes are going to smell like soil, but if those have an uncharacteristically soil-like smell, like freshly turned earth, that's probably scab that's causing that. It's a bacterial infection. It's a common organism in the soil and really common on things like Yukon Gold and some other varieties. But if they're kind of crusty-looking scabs on the outside, and they do sometimes rub off, but they shouldn't hurt the edibility at all. Again, as long as the flesh is undamaged, I think you should be fine.
All right, thank you. Mike, purslane, how to get rid of it? Exclamation point 4 times.
Yeah.
And cosmos, planted by seed, never flowered. What might be wrong on those? So we'll start with Mike and then come back to Rhoda.
Yeah, boy, wouldn't that be great if you could just get rid of your purslane. You know, I've seen it for sale at some of the greenhouses, so you might have a cash crop there that's just waiting for you to just take advantage of. So there's another angle you might want to think of this. Always a silver lining out there. Purslane is obviously, as you know, and most of the viewers on this program know, is just a horribly obnoxious weed, and there's just really no good way to get rid of it. Best thing you can do, as you know, it's a late emerger and it's a low grower, so getting that mulch on your garden earlier in the season is a good way to help minimize that. It's a fleshy plant, so it has the ability to break through some of that mulch, but you'll get some good suppression that way. That's really about the only thing going, and just keep at it. As we talked about on a couple episodes ago, some of those purslane plants can produce maybe 60,000 seeds on a large plant. So just keeping at it every year, prevent new seeding this fall. That'll help you down the road as well. So no good options. Get the hoe out, get the mulch, and that's about all you can do for that one. Keep at it.
You mentioned how succulent that type of plant is, and I've had experience where if you pull it, and you don't actually flip it over so the root is facing up and you have moist soil, that thing will just re-root.
Oh,
so
it's an incredible weed. Incredible weed. Makes a great salad, but incredibly nasty weed. Yep.
All right. So, Rhoda, when can I cut asparagus down? And the best time to fertilize asparagus, it's 2 to 5 years old, the plants that they have. So, if that makes any difference. Out of Mitchell.
The fertilizing, we'd like to see it when it's sending up the new ferns. So right after harvest ends for about a month or so is probably when I'd put it on. As far as cutting it back, I always like to, as long as it's green, it's still sending energy back down to the root. So you want to wait until that's died back, and then you can cut it back. If you want, you can leave the fern over winter and let it catch snow if you're in an area that didn't get all the moisture this year. And I'm going to go back a second to the cosmos question.
Yep.
And my guess offhand is either it's not getting enough sun, and if it's in a sunny spot, you might want to look at fertility, because cosmos is one of those flowers that doesn't like very much fertilizer. So if you've got too much nitrogen in there, it might be that you're getting a lot of nice fern growth, but not much flower.
Okay, good. Thank you. Well, up next, Gardenline revisits McCrory Gardens in Brookings to see what is featured in all the American display gardens. This is the red garden, the yellow garden, and the blue garden. Here's a brief glimpse at what we can see there. All right. Well, we certainly appreciate those beautiful sights that we saw. And if you want to see them in real life, be sure to stop by McCrory Gardens. So, as happens other weeks, we do have some questions and samples that come in as far as some emails that we have. This one comes from Rapid City. They have 2 peach trees. One is a Bailey Hardy peach tree and the other is Reliance peach tree. I got these from a local nursery last year in the spring and planted them when I got home the same day. Both trees have had great new growth this year, 14 to 15 inches on the branches. This past summer, they had a lot of sap balls that are on the main trunk, and these sap balls are all 3 inches or higher. I know that they have been injured by a weed trimmer and lawnmower. I water the trees every other day unless it rains for about 10 minutes. The drainage is good, and I also have 3 plum trees, 2 pear trees, and 1 cherry tree in the backyard, and these trees do not seem to have this problem. I've sent along a couple of images, which I believe are on the screen right now. Larry, you want to tackle that one? Or?
Not really.
No? Okay. Who would like to do that one? Rhoda? Okay.
Does it say it was injured or it was not injured?
Yeah, they mentioned as far as some weed eater and lawnmower damage towards the base of the tree. Yep. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Well, anytime we have injury, of course, that's an entry point for disease.
I take that back. They have not. They know for sure that they have not been injured by weed eater and
we
lawnmower.
don't want to have our viewer call back in.
Nope, that's true. Yep.
Okay. And of course, any kind of injury can cause an opening for either fungus or bacteria. And one of the injuries that can occur is cold injury. And that's what I suspect started this problem. Both these trees, even though they're called hardy and Reliance is the hardiest of our peaches, they're just a little bit on the edge for us. And we did have some pretty cold spells in Rapid last winter. So you might have gotten just a little bit of cold damage that opened up a wound for either fungi or bacteria. Now, if you see spots on the leaves, it's probably a bacterial infection on the canker, and there's not much you can do. Prune it out if that's possible. If it's a fungal, again, sanitation of trying to remove that area if you can. If you can't, it's just a case of it will actually spread to some of the other prunus species. So you're going to want to try to remove that area if you can. To avoid this, the main thing is just to avoid injury. Almost 15 inches of growth suggests to me that you're probably going a little too high on the nitrogen, so you may want to cut that back a little bit because that'll tend to make trees a little more susceptible both to winter injury and subsequent diseases.
Okay, so leave the tree, but work on that infected area. Is that what I heard? Okay.
Right.
Good.
Yeah, they'll need every bit of that growth this winter. I've got a peach tree in my yard, and every year about half that growth dies back over the winter so when you get those cold snaps. Like you said, they're marginal for this area, and expect a lot of pruning.
All right, good. Thank you. We have another one that came in from Kadoka. And this is graphic number 4. Attached is a photo of a lime light hydrangea planted late spring 2008 on the east side of a white vinyl fence. There are 3 hydrangeas alternated with 3 rose bushes. The hydrangeas are leafed out, or have leafed out and bloom beautiful 6 to 8 inch blossoms late summer, early fall of both 08 and 09. This year, the foliage started out green, and as summer progressed, the leaves are dry and brown, with new shoots seeming to dry up immediately. Blossoms should be setting on, and there's no sign of that. The rose foliage does not look that great either, but still having reoccurring blooms, and the new foliage is nice and green. This summer, it started out cool and wet and turned very hot with a major infestation of grasshoppers. 2 applications of insecticide Tempo was applied throughout the yard along with an application of Exile CS. The plants have been kept watered during the hot weather. The hydrangeas were purchased through the local conservation district in Bear Brook. Any thoughts on what might be going on there and what you would recommend if you know what it might be?
Well, it looks to me like it's something in the environment that's affecting something down at the roots or the crown, because we're seeing the whole bush turn. It's not something like a leaf spot or that sort of thing that would be affecting from the leaves on down. For that reason, I don't think it was probably the insecticides, or we'd probably be seeing something like a spot damage on it. And Larry,
Well, I'm not an expert in hydrangeas at all. I had this problem on some rhododendron where Phytophthora actually invaded. Again, the soils affect some of these plants, rhododendron especially. Hydrangea, you notice the blooms aren't always as colorful as we like. Part of that's a pH issue. Again, I don't know if that's going to affect the disease susceptibility, but I suspect it does, especially with something like a rhododendron that likes the more acidic soils. Hydrangea in this case certainly could be affected by a root-infecting fungus like Phytophthora. We might want to take a look at a sample of that. You could certainly bring that into the county office. If it is indeed one of those root-affecting diseases like that, like Phytophthora, we want to know that, because you're not going to want to go back to those same locations with that same plant for some years. In fact, you're probably going to want to rotate species there. But we'd like to know that for sure. Maybe a good plant sample if you've got some tissue that's not quite completely gone, or if you've got a plant that you're going to get rid of, it's a good idea maybe to bring that into the county office to get that looked at.
All right. This is from DeSchmidt in Rhoda. We have 2 zucchini squash in the same garden. They're supposed to be green zucchini, summer squash. However, we have a golden yellow zucchini. I wonder what happened. Did it get crossed or what? Or
you know, with the cucurbits, any of the cucurbits, the squashes, the gourds, every once in a while we get an outlier of some sort, and I'm not sure if it's pollination that got cross-pollinated in the seed bed, so that the seed that you got was not quite what they thought, or if it was a little seed that hung up in the packaging equipment and got in with the next package, or even a genetic variation. But with the cucurbits, it's not that unusual sometimes to get something that we didn't quite expect. Now, if you're thinking, well, is it pollination within the garden this year? No, because the shape of the fruit and the size and so forth of the characteristics of the fruit are determined by the mother plant, not any pollen source. So only if you save that seed from year to year would that be an issue.
Well, and we don't know. I don't know for sure here. But would a plant have a yellow and a green on the same plant?
If that's the case, then it's a genetic aberration, okay, where one little chromosome just went a little crooked or something.
Yeah. So if they're all yellow on a plant, then a seed probably fell in a packet or something from. Okay, so that's how they can kind of tell. Rhoda, got my garden in late this year, around the first week or final week of May. I planted cantaloupe for the first time and have melons in various stages of development in the garden. Can you please advise how I can tell when it's time to harvest the cantaloupe? They do a follow-up question. They also planted pumpkins for the first time for the grandchildren to pick at Halloween. Many are already bright orange, however. Will they keep until Halloween? And when do we harvest those?
And where are they from?
This is from Del Rapids.
Oh, okay. The cantaloupe first, and by the way, end of May is actually the very earliest you want to plant these cucurbit crops. The cantaloupe and pumpkin you can plant into June, so they're not like some of our other crops. As far as ripeness for melons, sometimes you can kind of tell by feel or smell, but the foolproof way to tell is just give it a real gentle tug, and if it comes off from the stem, it's ready. And if you think you're going to have to cut it, leave it on because it's not ripe yet. Cantaloupe have that nice way of detaching very readily when they're ripe, so that's That's a very easy sign. The pumpkins, I'm kind of wondering the same thing. I've got orange pumpkins in my garden, and I know that when I give them the fingernail test to see if they're hard, they're still soft. So I'm going to leave them on my vine until I see some reason to take them back off.
Explain the fingernail test.
When pumpkins or gourds are ready to harvest, or any of the winter squash are ready to harvest, it should be hard enough so that if you gently press your fingernail into it, like into your skin, it will not go in. Okay. So they harden up some. So look for that. If you want to try something different, one way to cure winter squash is to put it in a very hot and humid place, like about 85 degrees and about 95% humidity for 2 or 3 days, and then put it in normal storage. That helps the coating to harden up.
Okay, good. Thank you, Rhoda. The next question I have here somewhat relates to what you talked about a little bit ago with the zucchini. And the question is, are seeds saved from a sweet dumpling squash true to the parent? I was given some seeds from last year's crop, planted them, the vines are doing great. The squash, however, looks like they were crossed with a basketball. Just a few are normal sizes. I've tried any. I have not tried any yet to check out the flavor. But I think that goes back to what you were saying before with.
Our squashes, because they have male and female blossoms, very easily cross with other kinds of squashes, so that bee may have brought pollen over from something else. So if there were any other cucurbits in the area or in the squash pumpkin arena, you might have gotten some outcrossing there.
Yeah. Probably not a basketball, but something that was about that large, I guess.
And maybe it'll be the next great thing. But
yeah, so.
Give them a try.
Tastes like.
John, somewhat related to horticulture here because of the insect that the worm that they mentioned here, is that they're finding wire worms in their carpets in the house.
Yeah, this is one of those interesting ones because it seems like a lot of times in the fall I start getting questions about what to do about wire worms in houses, and typically we end up dealing with something that isn't a true wire worm. And when I say that, I kind of hate those common names because it's very difficult to tell what you're dealing with when you talk about a wire worm. The true wire worms that we talk about are the larvae of the click beetles, the elaterids. These are the ones that you'll find feeding on grass roots of various sorts and other roots. And it'd be very unusual to find those in a house. Possible, but very unusual. The ones that would look most like them and could be in a house are the darkling beetle larvae or mealworms. And they would look fairly similar. They'd be about the same color and about the same size. They would be a stored product pest and something that you may end up with in a house. The best way to get rid of those is trying to clean up whatever they're attracted to, whatever stored product you have that they're coming into. The ones that typically people are calling wire worms that they're finding in houses at certain times are actually millipedes. They're not insects at all. Those are the adults that you're finding. They're not larvae of any sort, but they're long and kind of wiry, and people call them wire worms. And you'll tell these apart from the others because these will have actually 2 pairs of legs per body segment. Whole length of that body all the way down, they'll have legs. The others will only have legs at the front, maybe some little appendage kind of sticking up on the tail end of the larva. And if you do have the millipedes as your wire worms, they're probably just coming in as scavengers, trying to find some shelter, pretty common in humid conditions. What I tell people normally is just sweep them up, throw them out, either in the trash or just throw them outside. You know, if you put down a barrier product around the outside, you can kill some of those, but you end up sweeping up dead ones as opposed to sweeping up live ones. You might as well save yourself the money and just sweep up the live ones and throw them out.
All right. Now, millipedes, they're the ones that if you touch them, or typically if they die within the home, it looks like a coil of rope. They kind of curl around.
Yep, they'll curl up. Legs usually are kind of underneath the body segments. The centipedes have the legs sticking out to the side more or less, or sometimes up almost and then down. Millipedes are scavengers. Centipedes tend to be hunters, predators.
All right, good. Rhoda, Sioux Falls, tomatoes on their plants. They're all green. They've cut some of the leaves off to get the sun to them, but they're still not turning red.
it takes a long time. You see those green fruit and you're ready to have it ripe. But You can figure about a month before mature green turns red. So.
And they don't necessarily need the sun for that. Is that correct?
No.
Okay. So, Mike, Elk Point. Weeds are taking over our lawn. Crabgrass and spreading leafy weeds. Should I spray this fall? And what should they use if they do?
Yeah,
and that's about as close as we're going to get what type of weeds.
Okay.
What we just had
yeah, well, you got a mess. Yeah, well, fall's not a bad time for a lot of those broadleaf weeds. You know, those perennials like dandelion and field bindweed or creeping Jenny, creeping Charlie, that minty smelling one. All those are perennials, and fall is the best time for those. But your crabgrass, you're going to have to hit that next spring, like we mentioned earlier, with a weed and feed. You're going to want to make that application last week of April, first week of May, or roughly maybe about the time the lilacs bloom is when you want to do that. So if you have crabgrass, remember where it's at out in your yard and apply a weed and feed maybe next spring. But otherwise, for your broadleaf weeds, yeah, there might be some foliar, you know, weed begons, Trimex, things like that you want to apply in the fall. And usually September or maybe even later into October, once the tree leaves start turning, once your garden's in, October is a pretty good time to go after a lot of those perennials.
All right. Rhoda from Del Rapids. They're looking for some shade tree varieties that you would recommend that are fairly rapid growth but don't need a lot of attention. Some fall color would be appreciated. This is an interesting one here, and that is, then how far away from the house should we plant these, as well as the septic system line should we plant these trees? So,
I'm going to refer that one to your local county extension office, because they'll be able to give you some printed materials so you can see the shape of things and how because our shade trees can get a lot of different sizes, and some of them have problems with septic tanks and some don't. So go ahead and call your county extension office and they can help you with that one.
Okay. But I know septic systems, those trees, they will go to find that moisture, and once they get in there, they can be a heck of a problem to try to get out.
Especially anything like the poplars or willows or any of those are really good at finding those.
Okay. All right. Oh, aerating the lawn. What's the best time to do that?
Actually, now is a pretty darn good time. We talked about reseeding the lawn. Well, that means we're in the cool season of good lawn growth, so go ahead and do it now.
Okay, that would be a good time for that. All right, good. And that's all the time we have for this evening. Just to let you know, Garden Line does repeat twice a week on South Dakota Public Broadcasting Digital Channel 3, which is also known as the Create Channel. The encore broadcast can be seen Thursdays at 11 a.m. Central and Saturdays at 4 p.m. Central. Check your local listing to find the SDPB Digital Channel 3 where you live. Now time to wrap up, and thanks to our panel of experts, John Keycaper, Brookings County Extension Educator, Rhoda Burrows, Extension Horticulturalist, Larry Osborne, Extension Plant Pathologist, and Mike Meckning, Extension Weed Specialist. Thanks to our phone volunteers, the Minnehaha County Master Gardeners, and thanks to you for watching and calling in. Have a good evening and happy gardening.
This program is funded in part by Swiftel Communications.